The eerie warning my grandparents got. Just to preface this event, my grandparents are highly religious, and they don't believe in the paranormal. Only what's included in the Bible, like God, the devil, angels, etc. To this day, they both experience this and talk about it as divine intervention, but we've never been able to explain it. Back in the 1960s, my grandparents were newly married and in their 20s, and had inherited their forever home from my grandpa's uncle, a rural, isolated farm that was a few miles away from the closest town and other neighbors. My grandpa's father was ill at the time and lived a further 20 miles away from them, important for the story later. It was the most mundane, normal night, and they were in the house alone, just themselves and their young family. My grandma had just finished putting down their 2 toddlers for the night, my uncles. They were sitting by the fire in silence, and my grandpa was lighting up a cigarette. Out of nowhere, they both heard a female voice very close to them shout my grandpa's name, "Jim!" My grandpa described it as a combination of sounding like his mother and his aunt. He couldn't quite distinguish who it was, but he knew the voice was familiar to him and sounded like a family member. The voice sounded urgent, like someone was calling to him for help. They both looked at each other and asked, "Who is that at this hour?" They reckoned the voice came from outside because they were basically home alone with their 2 young boys, who were asleep at this point. My grandpa takes his flashlight and goes outside to check who was around and try and find the woman calling for him. There was no car out the front, it was just their own vehicles. Bear in mind they lived in the middle of nowhere, so there was a very unlikely possibility that someone would have walked to their farm. He was outside for about 15 minutes checking all their barns and land around the house, and he couldn't find anyone. He returned to the house to ask my grandma if anyone turned up, which they didn't. They both looked at each other, said, "That was very strange," and went back to what they were doing. In no less than 10 minutes later, they heard the exact same voice again, even closer, calling for my grandpa's name, "Jim." My grandpa got shivers down his spine and had this gut-wrenching feeling that something just wasn't right with his family. My grandma's face is white as a sheet and she's getting really freaked out at this point. Instead of looking for the person who owns the voice again, my grandpa decided he's going to drive to his parents' house because he just felt something was wrong. They didn't have a telephone yet in the house. My grandma was too freaked to stay on the farm on her own after hearing the voice, that she went upstairs, pulled their toddlers out of their beds. This was about 10-11 p.m. now, and they all got in the car to take the journey back to my grandpa's folks' house. When they arrived, my grandpa's mother was sitting with her husband crying, and had just told them that she feared the worst for my grandpa's dad. He had a very bad day with his illness, and she feared he wouldn't last the night. Because of that warning voice, my grandpa got to see his father one last time, and he did die about 30 minutes after they got there. To this day, my grandparents still get freaked out telling that story, and neither of them can explain what exactly happened or who the voice came from. My grandpa, being religious, believes it was God giving him a sign, but I'm really not so sure. What do you think?